KSDB News presents a new roundtable discussion series where members of the K-State and Manhattan community come together to discuss local issues. We now take you live to Studio E in historic McCain Auditorium for tonight's program.
Hello and welcome everyone to the second edition of the KSDB Roundtable discussion series this semester. So the goal of these roundtable discussions is to provide our listeners with valuable information pertaining to relevant topics. So seeing as May is Mental Health Awareness Month, we will be exploring the topic of mental health tonight. So during the broadcast, if you have any questions you would like answered surrounding the topics of mental health, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, or suicide, please give us a call at 785-532-0919, and that's again 785-532-0919, or send us a tweet to @KSDBFM with the hashtag KSDB Roundtable, and we'll get you on the air with us live with our guests. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to call in or send a tweet. Now, before we get started this evening, I would like to take a moment to thank everyone for coming and who made this broadcast possible. So many thanks to James, who kind of set this whole thing up for us. And many thanks to our news staff for contacting all the necessary people as well and getting everybody here. And, of course, our guests for coming in on a very stormy and dreary Friday night. So thank you all for coming. And we'll go ahead and get started and have everybody introduce themselves. So just say your name, a little bit about what you do, and what you want our listeners to get out of this experience. So we'll start with Karen. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Karen Smothers. I'm a licensed specialist clinical social worker and a licensed clinical addiction counselor at Pawnee Mental Health Services. I've worked there for over 20 years. I'm the assistant director and clinical director, so I oversee all of our clinical programs. What I'm hoping people get out of this tonight is heightened awareness of suicide and, of course, suicide prevention. What can we do to prevent this? What information is out there? Maybe dispel some of the myths that are out there about just mental health services in general or mental illness, and increase mental health literacy.
Perfect. Okay.
Hi, my name's Tina Steffens-Meyer, and I am a licensed clinical professional counselor and also a licensed clinical addiction counselor. I am in private practice over in the Southwind area. I have been working in the field of mental health for about 17 years now, and I'm really glad that we're doing this roundtable tonight, because oftentimes suicide is something that people don't want to talk about, and they don't often know what to do or what signs and symptoms to look for. So I'm just glad with May being Mental Health Awareness Month that we're going to bring some awareness to these issues.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Michelle Houston. I'm a clinical licensed social worker as well. I currently work out at Fort Riley at Irwin Army Hospital. I'm an Army veteran, and what I would like folks to get out of this tonight is understanding that mental health issues are actually as normal as everyday living, and to be able to access services and be okay with that.
Oh, great. Absolutely. Thank you.
Hello, and I'm Chaz, Mailey. I'm a licensed psychologist. I work at K-State in the counseling services. I also am part-time in private practice. One of the things that I'm hoping that people get out of this is the stigma reduction around mental health concerns.
Excellent. Perfect. Okay. And actually, right now, we do have a caller on the phone, right? Am I correct? Yeah. Nope. Not yet, but we will maybe later. So hopefully we're getting some people interested in calling in. So we do have that ability. So once again, that phone number is 785-532-0919 if you want to call in and ask our professionals any questions about mental health. So we'll go ahead and get started with our first question. To kind of speak to mental health as a whole, the issue of mental health, what age groups or demographics are most at risk and why for mental health issues?
Well, I think there's probably different ages of onset depending on the mental health problem. So if you're talking about depression, we know that depression can affect children, it can affect adolescents, young adults, older adults, middle adults, so kind of the whole lifespan, really. So depression, anxiety, actually among the population of adults in the United States, including young adults and college students, anxiety is the number one mental health problem in the United States, with depression following second. And then third, and this is mental health first aid statistics, substance use disorders are third across the United States among adults. And again, that group includes young adults, emerging adults, and college students. Anxiety, depression, we know can have some of its start in even childhood. The median age of onset for anxiety, for example, is the age of 11. So a lot of people start experiencing some of those symptoms, not all, but some of them do in childhood. Others, like substance use disorders, we know is a high-risk age group for that area is adolescence into young adulthood with, in fact, substance use disorder, 75% of substance use disorders starting before the age of 27. So that's a high-risk group.
Wow. So, yeah, I guess to speak to that, I mean, what would be some theories as to why, that age group in particular, being under 27, having such a problem, I guess, with substance abuse?
Actually, there's a lot of really interesting theories out there. And I don't want to.
Sure.
I'll just say, just real quick, and pass it off here. There's some research to show that as the brain is developing, because we know that's an incredible point in which the brain is still developing. We're finding research that shows it doesn't fully develop till about age 25. That sometimes there's some dip in the neurotransmitters. That part of just how we're wired is to kind of learn to take risks and identify new adventures. Without that kind of wiring, I think some of us would just be comfortable and not explore. Unfortunately, I think for some adolescents, in terms of kind of finding those risks, maybe being somewhat impulsive, I think they're drawn to what else is out there. And of course, there's a lot of marketing and pressure to those groups in terms of especially college age with drinking, as well as lots of drug use, which we know changes brain chemistry. And the research is just showing that before the age of 27, that's a high risk.
Excellent. And did you have something to say about that, Chaz? Or?
Oh, no, I very much agree with what she's saying. I think part of the collegiate culture is alcohol is so intricately intertwined with that. One of the unfortunate things is there aren't many opportunities for students to socialize, I think, or that's the perception outside of doing things that involve alcohol, going to the bars. It could probably be something that's changed and shifted, but I think when you look at universities as a whole, it probably has to come more from the students leading that and pushing that change, really.
Okay, excellent. Well, we do, I think, have our caller on the line now, so we're going to go ahead and take our caller, Brennan from Manhattan. Brennan, what do you have to ask us?
Hey, I just have, friends that go through this stuff, and a lot of them have this apathetic attitude, I guess. And, as a friend, I want to be there for them, but I can't really relate to them, and also I don't want to seem like I'm trying to fix their problems. So how would you guys go about handling that situation?
Sure, it's questions open for anyone, so.
Well, I think just being available to your friend and just listening. You don't have to try to fix anything. Just have it be a listening ear for them as they try to process. And then that actually you can move into a brainstorming idea of what to do differently. If you can establish maybe a pattern, if they start noticing there's a pattern of symptoms or feelings that kind of come up at certain times, then they can prepare to do something differently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was going to add with that is, I agree with what Michelle is saying about not feeling like you have to fix the problem and being supportive. And I have noticed, especially with college students, a lot of them maybe have never been in therapy or they don't know what they're feeling. So just being supportive and knowing that you could suggest some resources that are available. Sometimes it's a good move just to try to convince them to go see their physician, or you could talk about what it's like to refer to a therapist. But there are, as far as the apathy, that actually is one of the signs and symptoms of depression and other mental health disorders.
Yeah, if you are a student and your friend is also a student, if you had some concerns, you could walk over with them to counseling services during the hours that were open. You could call in if you had some questions about what you might want to do to try and handle some of the issues that are coming up with your friend. And I think, as the other said, being really open, letting them know, again, that you're not there to try and fix the problems, kind of asking what is it that they might need from you in order to be of help. And sometimes really just kind of like being open in that way, people will take those opportunities to talk to you, I think.
Excellent. Well, hopefully, Brennan, you got your question answered. I think we got some excellent responses from our guests. That was great. And if you have a question out there, you can call in. Again, that number is 785-532-0919. And there's also social media open if you want to send in a tweet to @KSDBFM with the hashtag KSDB Roundtable. You can get your questions in that way as well. But yes, thank you again for calling in, Brennan. And we'll keep moving down the line here. So we just did talk a little bit about some of the major mental health issues in the U.S. and the different demographics that they're faced with. And we talked about how anxiety, depression, and substance abuse were the top three, Karen. And one thing I guess I would ask is, in terms of like, is there a difference in military personnel or college students? Do you see a large gap in difference in, I guess, those three major mental health issues? Is maybe military experience more of one thing versus college students another, or is it very similar? Because they are very similar age groups. They're just experiencing a lot of different experiences, I guess.
Yeah, what I currently tell soldiers when they come in is that the military, excuse me, especially the Army, it's designed for anxiety. It's designed for you to react. Basic training, you meet your drill sergeant, they're in your face, they're yelling at you. So you very quickly try to figure out how to get under the radar. And so you're always thinking, you're always planning ahead. And then you come into the large body of the military, racing thoughts. Okay, what do I have to do now? How do I beat the traffic? How do I avoid any errors? And so a lot of our military folks and veterans, it's normal, but it's actually anxiety until they learn how to relax. And when I ask soldiers, when's the last time you've been relaxed? When's the last time you had a massage? Do you even know what that feels like? No, because that's just a fast-paced institution. And then when they get out and they become veterans, there's a transition period of what's wrong with civilians? Let's go, let's move, let's hustle. And life doesn't have to move like that. So anxiety would probably be one of the major issues that the military addresses, with depression being secondary. And then when we add combat tours into that, we have a lot of symptoms of post-traumatic stress just because we're faced with an abnormal situation of being in combat.
Okay, excellent. So it's more about the environment that they're exposed to that directly corresponds to the issues that they face.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, and for the other three, if you guys would like to answer for both, college-age students or just community members, especially for that age group under 27, just what are some of the major issues for them, and why might those be happening?
So, yeah, anxiety is definitely an issue that students face. When you look at where they're coming from, oftentimes there's this desire to achieve or this pressure to achieve. There's this pressure to fit in. There's this pressure to perform, be that academically, athletically, if you're playing an instrument, if you dance. Those things you're sort of pushed to the brink in some ways, and then you go to college and it's a very different environment. It's a number of other people that are quite talented or quite skilled, and then there's that pressure to compete again. And then if you, for some reason, don't view yourself as matching up with some of your peers, or there's the anxiety of being away from home because home is so comfortable, because not necessarily blaming parents, but there's sort of the idea, the helicopter parent is kind of like, okay, now I'm on my own for the first time trying to sort through this thing called life. I'm having to make these adult decisions, and then you look at the pressure as you get towards the end of your college career. What do I do next? There's a stress of I think unfortunately some students knowing that the amount of money that they've paid for school and the types of jobs that they'll be able to get are commensurate. And so then there's that pressure that comes with having the student loans and then being in debt for, X number of years. So, it's definitely a very pervasive issue. Very easily some of those things can cause depression as well. And then when you look at college students, another issue that comes up with them are relationship concerns. We could talk all day about the impact of social media, how it sort of hinders the ability to engage with another person. There's that pressure of living with someone for the first time, perhaps that's not a member of your family. How do you navigate those difficulties? If you've lived with a lot of other children, you've been an only child. Some parents were a bit more strict when it came to cleanliness of the home. Others were a little more lenient. That causes some conflict. There's a tendency to be passive aggressive. People aren't necessarily talking out the issues because they don't know how to talk out the issues. So I could just go on and on about those. So I'll move away from that.
Okay, well, we have reached our first break, I think, so we're going to go ahead and take a quick 2-minute break. But if you guys want to stick around, please do. We will be taking calls throughout, so if you want to call in, that number again is 785-532-0919, or tweet to us at KSDBFM. So we're going to go ahead with our first break, and we'll be back very shortly. Welcome back, everybody. We are in the middle of the KSDB's second roundtable discussion of the semester surrounding mental health, and we have 4 professionals with us. We have Chaz, we have Michelle, and we have Tina and Karen, all here from different organizations across the city of Manhattan and the university, as well as Fort Riley. And we're here talking about mental health. So again, if you have any questions that you would like answered, you can call in at 785-532-0919, or send us a tweet or comment on Facebook or any of our other social medias at KSDB-FM. So we're going to go ahead and get back to the questions. And I guess the next topic that I'd like to kind of cover, and I know we've talked about this quite a bit already, is the topic of anxiety. And for me personally, I do know several people that are affected by anxiety, and I see them go through it every day. And it's one of those things where I can see that it's something very small that might trigger it, like going over a bridge, like simply driving over a bridge, or riding in a car with someone they've never ridden in a car before. And it's something that I know I struggle with, having a hard time kind of understanding what it's like from their perspective. So is there any way that maybe you could help our listeners and others that don't fully understand, what anxiety is, kind of give them a perspective on what it's like to go through that experience?
Well, as someone who can sometimes be very anxious, I'd be happy to talk about it. Anxiety, I had a colleague once say something I thought was very wise, and he said, depression seems to be about a person's inability to control the past, and anxiety seems to be about our inability to control the future. And I just think there's some real wisdom in that, at least in my experiences in working with people. Anxiety, I think I have to sometimes remind people, is a normal human emotion. I think it's not always a pleasant emotion, but typically it's a normal human emotion that we're wired for, so that for self-preservation, fight, flight, freeze. So in some ways it helps athletes perform well, or musicians perform well. I once saw the example where it's like inflating a tire. You want enough stress to be able to inflate the tire so it rolls smoothly, but you don't want it to explode once it hits a bump. And so stress, anxiety tends to be something that helps us function, helps aid workers be able to function in high stress environments. It helps mothers stay up all night with a child. When people start experiencing anxiety that's pretty unrelenting, it doesn't let down, there's no ability to kind of relax, as Michelle talked earlier about, like, when's the last time you've been able to let down from that anxiety and kind of regroup. So people who have just unrelenting anxiety, and it starts interfering with work or school, carrying out their daily activities, engaging in satisfying relationship. Yeah, definitely. Sleep would be a big one, because then that perpetuates a lot of other things. That's when we know there's a problem, and that's when we suggest people get help. We start seeing it interfering with those daily life.
Okay.
Yes. In private practice, I do see a fair amount of college students, and I wanted to kind of comment on that specifically. I see what we would call generalized anxiety, where, and this is with really adults, adolescents, but just to comment on the college students specifically, what I see happening a lot is when they are at home, and Chaz touched on this earlier, parents are there, they have the comfort of home, and then they often get to college where, the classes are bigger, and if they have social anxiety where it's difficult for them to be in public or, sometimes in closed spaces, what we start to see is students getting very stressed out. And the more they are unable to attend their classes, the more their grades start to drop. And then, like I said, what we're seeing is intense stress. And sometimes they don't even know they're dealing with what we call anxiety. And it's very physiological, but it just, all of that can kind of snowball once they start feeling that anxiety. And really they don't, like with depression, sometimes they're embarrassed to tell their professors that they're struggling. So I did just want to comment on that as well.
Okay.
Well, and
Excellent.
I think sometimes people don't even recognize, again, coming from the military background of a high stressful environment, you are trained to focus on the mission. You are trained to keep going, keep going. And so when I was working on my master's degree, everybody's asking, how are you handling your stress? I'm not stressed because I'm already thinking about the next thing I'm doing. And then I keep going, and then 6 months later, I hit a brick wall, and I'm like, oh, wow, I've been stressed. And all the signs were there, but I didn't pay attention to it because I keep focusing on what I have to do next. Okay, done. The next thing. And so when friends are asking you, hey, you look like you're stressed, there might be there's some things that are going on physically with you. If you're not sleeping and you're ruminating, and you're tossing and turning and there's muscle tension, there's a lot of signals that tell us that we're stressing out or we have some anxiety if we just slow down and pay attention a little bit.
Okay. And I mean, to kind of expand upon that topic, just about the signs of anxiety and being able to recognize those in yourself. And, Brennan kind of asked a little bit earlier just about what would you do, from a third person perspective, like how, I guess I would ask, how would you interact with someone who is experiencing symptoms of anxiety like you may have noticed and they haven't yet?
Mm-hmm. Well, I offer 50 ways to relax, and these are informations you can find online, how to relax. Go for a walk, go for a bike ride. If you have a pet, play with your pet. Disconnect from, computers and all that stuff. As simple as 15 minutes. Diaphragmatic breathing. Really focus on your breathing. Listening to soft music. I mean, there's a lot of things out there that can help you for just a few minutes. We're not saying sit for meditating for an hour, but like even 2 to 3, 5 minutes can help you just kind of take a deep breath.
Yeah, I would just validate everything Michelle was saying. Exercise is showing to be almost a medication in itself because it releases a lot of our endorphins and it increases some of the neurotransmitters in our brain that can be almost in some cases just as effective as medication. So exercise, especially for anxiety, and we also recommend it for depression, can help relieve that. It helps our bodies move. It helps kind of burn off some of that extra energy. So if you have a friend, offer to go for a run with them, offer to play basketball or something with them to get them out and moving and away from screens and away from kind of the virtual network. And we know that engaging with people, all these things that Michelle mentioned, engaging with them face to face, laughter, all those things releases all those healthy endorphins in the brain that can actually relieve anxiety. Getting good sleep, good diet, and exercise. Avoid caffeine. If you're someone that's anxious, caffeine absolutely ranks that up. And I had to learn that personally, so I'm pretty jittery and anxious and a little cranky if I've had 4 or 5 cups of coffee by mid-morning. So I've learned that as an anxious person, I find that I am an anxious person. When I reduce the amount of caffeine intake, I just was able to look at problems in life a little bit more calmly and without that edge of anxiety. So I would certainly want to watch diet and exercise as well.
Excellent. Well, and kind of to expand, I know you mentioned something about keeping people away from screens. So you were referring to like cell phones and TVs, of course. Well, one thing I think that kind of just to comment on that is that society as a whole is a lot more exposed to social media and the media in general. And one thing I think that has happened in the past is that there's a certain portrayal that the media plays to mental health. And I would ask you, what is your opinion of the media's portrayal of mental health, and do you think that it's accurate or that it's actually harmful or beneficial in any way?
I think it can be both.
Mhm.
I've seen both, at least on my own personal social media that I use. A lot of it depends on the person and what, you tend to post what things that you believe. I will say about social media, though, I overall feel like there are some really positive messages going out that weren't able to be communicated in the past. So that makes me feel a little bit more optimistic.
Yeah, I don't want to get into a topic area that's too controversial, but when we, look at the ability to purchase firearms, and one of the things that's changed recently in those conversations is, it's not a gun issue, it's a mental health issue. And there may be some aspects of that are true. However, one of the concerns I have about the conversations around that is, well, now we just need to lock up all these people and make sure they don't have access to firearms. And I think in many ways that can be damaging to the community of mental health. Individuals that maybe have had those struggles before, I think that can be really problematic, because there's perhaps this opinion that these individuals that are engaging in these violent acts have some sort of pre-existing condition that's going to make them more prone to it. And so I would say that those are the situations wherein I have a few more concerns about how mental health is talked about or portrayed. But even if you go to websites like BuzzFeed, they had this really nice, I think, Mental Health Awareness Week. They had a number of articles from individuals that had experienced different types of mental health concerns, talked very elegantly about how they have dealt with their experiences, what those experiences were like. So I think, kind of going back to what I see on social media, those are the things I oftentimes see from at least my peers or the people that I'm friends with on sites like Facebook around mental health.
Excellent. And then for you, Michelle, I guess I'd ask, since a lot of times military personnel are isolated from the media and from social media and being able to use their phones in some instances, if they're deployed or on tour, they may not be able to see everything at real time and see things happen. Is it different for them and the way they experience social media, and are there different outlets for them or different portrayals that they see?
Well, I don't think so, because they have access to media just as much as if they're deployed or not. But they will control if something doesn't need to go out right away. But the military has changed its viewpoint on mental health, really trying to make it take away the negative stigma that's associated with it. And I noticed that with the younger soldiers coming in, they see it as a positive option, even if it's just someone they need to talk to or vent to. When I was in, and I've actually been out of the Army 20 years, it wasn't an option. You didn't know anyone who went to mental health, behavioral health. And so the military has encouraged, well, they're even on Facebook. I mean, First Division has a Facebook. There's just so many ways to use social media to get information out and let people know that you're not alone. I wrote down that 1-800 number, 273-TALK, for veterans, and press 1. The documentary that's out about that. So I think social media and just the media in general is being used to educate people, to let them know that resources are available.
Excellent. Okay, well, I think we've reached our second break, so we're going to go ahead and take another break really shortly here. If you stick with us, we are talking about mental health here on the KSDB Roundtable Discussion Series, and if you have any questions, please feel free to call. That number, once again, is 785-532-0919, or get access to any of our social media at KSDB FM. You can send us a tweet with the hashtag KSDB Roundtable. So with that, we're going to go for a quick break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. We are here in the second KSDB Roundtable discussion of the semester, this one surrounding mental health, and we have our four professionals with us, Chaz, Michelle, Tina, and Karen. And we've been discussing topics of anxiety, depression. We'll talk later about suicide as well, and just other areas of mental health and how they affect college-age students and also military personnel. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to call. And its number is 785-532-0919, or send us a tweet at KSTBFM. Okay, so we've covered quite a bit, but there are different areas. I guess we've kind of hit heavily on anxiety and a little bit on depression as well. But let's kind of transition and maybe talk about body image issues. And I know we talked a little bit about substance abuse and maybe how those two can be related. So do you feel that there are body image issues on this campus particularly, or in just college-aged individuals in general, or even in the military as well, and maybe how that might relate to future substance abuse or anything of that nature?
Well, as far as what we're seeing on campus, I can't give you any precise numbers, but that is a concern that we see with students. One of the things, and I may be wrong, that's shifted even in the past 10 years or so was that it's not just, before it was kind of considered something that primarily affected women, and that doesn't really seem to be the case anymore. Men are starting to experience more of the body image concerns. When we look at how, I don't want to speak for women and girls, but when we look at how women and girls are socialized from a very early age, this is what you're supposed to look like, this is how you're supposed to carry yourself, this is what you're supposed to fit into to be considered worthwhile, desirable, any number of things. There are those, and if you've already got like a proclivity for like anxiety, something like that, those issues are going to become more salient perhaps to you, or they're going to become stronger. As far as what we're seeing in men, I think there's kind of this idea that you have to fit a particular kind of physique. Not necessarily saying people that are spending hours in the gym are doing anything, wrong, but you'll see sometimes, am I muscular enough? Am I lean enough? Am I big enough? Is that going to somehow equate to me being more worthwhile, or are people going to be drawn to me more if I look a particular way?
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, that's something I feel like we did talk about a little bit earlier about how, college-aged years are very important for development and social aspects, but also, physiological aspects and with the brain as well. So on that topic, is there any concerns that you guys see, like with there any issues specifically with college-aged individuals compared to the rest of the population in terms of body image, or is this an issue that affects everybody kind of equally?
I guess I'd reiterate what Chaz said too about, I think society has placed a lot of pressure, males and females, and as he mentioned, I'm seeing more males concerned about being attractive, or maybe even just being noticed, being accepted in leadership positions. I think we're seeing more research about how people select leaders, and it is based largely on physiology as opposed to maybe intellect, which is a little scary. So I think as people hear that and know that, they're wanting to live up to an image that is it's not feasible. And so I think that we know that things like eating disorders, body image problems often overlay other mental health issues like depression and anxiety, and just kind of this sense of inadequacy. And maybe that does end up with issues with pressure and I want to be the life of the party and I'll outdo everyone here, or and I think that leads down a dangerous road.
Yeah, I was going to add that what I see with college students mostly, just a lot of them looking maybe for a partner, very concerned about what they look like. Sometimes the obsession with body image will result in starving themselves. Sometimes we see then binge eating, bulimia, but definitely with the college age, there tends to be what they would call hooking up, and just what do I look like, and it's very important as far as what they're wearing and how they look to the opposite sex or same sex, just depending.
And I think the military just brings a different aspect, because you have to maintain body weight standard in the military. And what happens with that is there's a lot of injuries that are associated with being in the military, and how you fit with your cohorts if you cannot do this physical issue? And then if you gain weight, what kind of soldier are you? So this is an internal battle you have about being part of the team. And it can create some anxiety, and probably more anxiety than depression. But I think that's just what's different with the college students. It's just trying to maintain that physical aspect requirement for you being in the military.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I mean, just if it, from a college student's perspective, and we kind of kept with this theme a little bit through this discussion, but from someone who may know somebody who has maybe even developed as far as an eating disorder or something like that based on body image issues, what would you recommend being able, as that friend, for them to do? Or how would you recommend that person, maybe themselves, to be able to get help? Or where would you push them to go first?
I think one thing that people, maybe well-meaning, do is focus specifically on the behavior. So people with eating disorders get really tired of hearing just about their way of coping with what's going on in their life. And you could attach that to lots of different behaviors, whether it be eating disorder, whether it be self-injury, whether it be substance use. People oftentimes resort to behaviors to cope with uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. And when people over-focus on just the behavior, we're forgetting what are the underlying thoughts and feelings. And people tend to become defensive because that's become my coping mechanism, and now you're threatening to take this away from me. And I've been using this to cope with these uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. And so oftentimes we encourage people who are trying to help to maybe take the focus off of the behavior and ask what's going on with this person, where their thought process is, how are they feeling, getting more to those core issues rather than just focusing on the behavior. I think we know and maybe even can think of examples in our own life where when focusing on that behavior just set up walls and defenses, and then people shut down and they're afraid to talk to you because it's going to always be about the eating, or it's always going to be about the alcohol. And so one of the things we do to encourage people is to get past the behavior and focus on thoughts and feelings.
Excellent. Okay, and then to sort of transition, I guess, into the topic of substance abuse, and you mentioned, not bringing up the issue directly or the behavior directly, especially, I think what I see a lot among college students is alcohol abuse, and I think that is one of the topics that, at least from my perspective, it seems that a lot of students don't even realize what they're doing or how far they're going, and how this could affect them later in life. So, is there any advice or just some signs that you would think that students should see or know in themselves or see in their friends, if alcohol abuse or other substance abuse does start to become an issue, or at what point does a substance abuse issue develop in a college-age student person?
Well, I think, as Karen mentioned earlier, that it's one thing, it's about control. So if you can go out and have a couple drinks and get up the next morning and go to class and function and keep your relationships and be social, that is a different story than what we're seeing with alcohol abuse or even alcohol or drug dependence, when it crosses over and it starts to interfere with someone's life. So because they went out the night before, they're hungover, they can't get to class, which makes them, again, to focus on the emotions, makes them feel bad about themselves. They're not feeling great about that. It's starting to cause probably a lot of problems in their life. And those are kind of some of the first signs and symptoms that we see of what would be the difference between substance use and abuse or dependence.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I think we are just about ready to go ahead and take another quick break, and we'll be back shortly. But we have still plenty more to talk about, and we have still plenty of time. So if you have any questions, please feel free to call that phone number and come on the air with us and ask our professionals at 785-532-0919, and we'll be back after these short messages. And we're going to go ahead and get right back into the questions. So a couple things that I think have hit really close to home recently. There was a young man who did take his own life not that long ago here on campus. And I know there has been some talk and there's been some concern, I guess, about the availability and the effectiveness of the online resources that the university has. So if there's anybody here that could maybe speak to just what ways and what methods and what outlets do students have to reach out online or over the phone, or specifically about campus issues or on-campus services.
So I think I understand the question. So where can students go? They can go to kstate.edu/counseling. There's a link there that is for students. If they're looking for just kind of general information, there's articles that are there. They can actually come in. We actually have what's known as counselor on duty shifts, and that's where there is a clinician that's available. If a student wants to walk in, they have concerns. If you want to walk a friend in, they can go and they can be seen by someone that day, especially depending on the severity of the issue. If you call the counseling services number after hours, it'll take you to an after hours counselor. I think Michelle mentioned an 800 number that students can call. And I believe on the counseling services website, there's a link for some of those things as well. As far as online support communities, there's something known as the University Life Cafe that can also be accessed through the counseling services page. That's got information about different things, so that might not just be like mental health, but also art, how to organize your room, how to prepare food on a budget as a college student, things like that. But then there's also articles that talk about issues relating to suicide.
Excellent. So, and the other day I was actually reading through an NPR article about suicide statistics, and according to a study by the Center for Disease Control, suicide rates have climbed for the first time since 1986. So if there's any, and this actually was seen especially in young girls, so if there are any theories or ideas that you guys might think that could be contributing to this, or just thoughts that you have on that issue?
Well, I think even Kansas statistics show, I find it interesting that the population that's most affected, males and females, like for example in Kansas, so 454 suicides in Kansas in 2014. You're looking at about 42,773 in the United States in 2014. That's the most current data we have available. And if you're interested in data, American Association of Suicidology is a very good resource as well. But what they're seeing is that trend has not been going down. So the trend has been gradually increasing. We know our veterans, and I'm sure Michelle can talk more about that, is a significant portion of that increase as well. I find it very interesting that the age group that has been, where we're seeing increases as well, according to American Association of Suicidology, is middle age group. So, for example, in Kansas, males and females died from suicide at about the same average ages, around 46.7 and 46.9 respectively. That to me is a little bit of a different trend. I guess I was used to focusing a lot on adolescents, young adults, of course, and the other age group that we've seen higher risk factors is the older adults, 65, even 75 and older. So that's kind of puzzling, I think, in a lot of ways. Lots of theories. So I've heard lots of papers and research about economics and suicide. We certainly have, I think we've tried to improve resources and access, and we have lots of campaigns about fighting the stigma of getting help. There's a Zero Suicide Initiative research project that some of the mental health centers in Kansas and throughout the country are working on. And the National Council of Behavioral Health Care is also working on a Zero Suicide Initiative. We're definitely seeing veterans pop up as a high-risk area. Firearms is a conversation that keeps getting up, and without getting into a whole side debate, as Chaz mentioned earlier, because men die by suicide more often than females. I think in that 2014 data, was it over 80%, I believe, were male. And then the number one method of suicide by males is firearms. So I still think there's a conversation worth having about that, but I don't want to go down that road or any controversy with that. But I just think statistically that's concerning to me. And then females, of course, they do attempt suicide more frequently. And then method of death tends to be, and this doesn't mean this is always the case, we're looking at aggregated data, is poisoning or overdose. So, yeah, I guess making sure people are aware of the resources, the National Suicide Lifeline that Michelle mentioned earlier, the 1-800-273-TALK. They have chat feature. I love that they're getting out now more on social media, talking to different age groups in their language, which I think we need to be doing.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned some statistics about male versus female suicide rates, and you said that males have a much higher rate of suicide. Would you be able to comment on the frequency that you could compare male versus female and those that seek help? And is there a difference between gender and who actually seeks professional help?
Oh, definitely. Females seek help more frequently than males. That shows up throughout the literature everywhere, and in my practice, or our practice, and I'm sure Tina and others can mention that. And I really like that the state of Colorado noted that we've got this disconnect between the highest males dying by suicide more often than females, but males are less likely to get treatment. And so this is kind of an interesting website for males if you're resistant to treatment. One that we've used in our mental health first aid classes is mantherapy.org. It's kind of a different way for men. Almost in some ways, it kind of pulls them in with a little bit of humor. That gives them a lot of resources about seeking mental health services and trying to address that disconnect, that it's okay to seek treatment.
Yeah, I would say one of the major issues for men is that, from a very early age, you're socialized to not be considered an emotional creature. That's a sign of weakness. That's a sign that others can dominate or overpower you. Therefore, if you're going to express anything, it needs to be anger. There's often this fear that you won't have an outlet for those, and you may not even have the language to speak to what kind of emotion you're experiencing from time to time. And so that's, why there's a higher incidence of substance abuse, tendency to react or behave violently. What we'll see in younger individuals is, for young men, and I guess this actually holds true for adult men as well, is that anger, or the anger is kind of how the depression is manifesting itself, the irritability from time to time. So one of the challenges sometimes when I am working with men in therapy is kind of giving them the language to speak to, what are perhaps the underlying issues that are happening here. Again, kind of, as Karen was saying, what are some of the other emotions? And you might have to, teach them that language kind of from the beginning. So then they, when this person looked at me this way, I was frightened, I was scared. Well, I can't demonstrate that I'm frightened or scared. So I worked in an adolescent treatment facility that unfortunately held lockdown component. But, I can't be scared because that's going to impact the level of respect that other people have for me. So, because I can't look this way, I'm going to be aggressive. Either I'll destroy my room, I'll create a shiv and go after the person. And when you actually sit them down and you give them the space and they feel safe to actually talk about those things, they'll say, "Yeah, I was really scared. I was afraid that he was going to do something that was going to hurt me, and I figured I would react first and more loudly than the other person to kind of protect myself."
And just to add to that, something I see is that women are more likely to express their emotions to friends or go through their social support networks and really get down and talk about this is what's going on, and they may feel free to cry with their friends. I don't see that happening with my male clients as much. When they get together with their male friends, they really aren't talking about some of those more serious emotions that they're feeling. And so what I see when I have a male client come in, and college students as well, there's really a positive response, because A lot of it, I think, is maybe a misperception about therapy. I don't know if they thought they were going to be lying on the couch and I was going to hypnotize them. But really, they come in and they can talk. They have a safe place to just open up and, like Chaz said, learn how to verbalize their emotions. And it becomes a lot easier. I think they realize how much it really helps to do that.
And I think validating their feelings, letting them know it's okay that you are hurt, you are disappointed, and that anger is that blanket. And if we peel that back a little bit and be vulnerable and give them permission to be vulnerable, then they can articulate, as Chaz mentioned, the language that, hey, you hurt my feelings, and I'm still the same person I am,
One of the things that's kind of interesting sometimes when men get together and they're not really that comfortable talking about their feelings, they'll start to drink, right? Well, then the emotion starts to come out. Then you can talk about how problematic that relationship was with that person and how you believed that this was going to be the person that you married and now they're gone. And so then when, the next morning rolls around, it's sort of like, well, hey, I was crying last night, but that was because I was drunk. That wasn't because I was actually feeling anything. So then it sort of like gives them an out in some ways, and it's really unusual, not unusual, but kind of interesting to see like how much of a stigma there is against being open with your emotions as a man. So
Excellent. Well, you're listening to 91.9 KSDB Manhattan, and we are talking about mental health, and we have a couple professionals in the studio with us. Before we take a break, I'm going to ask one more quick question. We've been talking a lot about the stigmas of seeking help between gender aspects, but are there any different, or are there any data that support that there are different demographics that don't seek help as much as others? I mean, in terms of age or ethnic background or anything like that. Because we know we've definitely talked about male and female stigmas, but is there other demographics?
Well, I think in the Black community, there's always been stigma for mental health, and that's always being discussed about seeking help. White men typically are the highest number of completed suicides, But however, I believe whites utilize services more too. So that's kind of an interesting twist on numbers.
I think when you look at the Black community and utilization of mental health, oftentimes the church kind of served as a place to get some of those needs met. Typically, these concerns were concerns of the spirit, and so you would talk to your pastor, you would speak with a deacon. I think one of the challenges is when you go to a therapist, is that person going to look like me? Are they going to potentially understand my experiences? Are they going to understand, perhaps where I came from? Is there a part where, and I don't necessarily think this is a problem, but is there a part where it's like, okay, am I going to have to bring this person sort of up to speed about my experiences? And, are they going to, approach me in a way that I'm not really sure what's going to happen? I can remember, and I've got no problem saying this, but I remember a time that I was in therapy, and my therapist started to speak to me with a Jamaican accent, and I'm thinking, okay, well, we don't really know each other. I'm not from Jamaica. I grew up in Indianapolis, so I'm not really sure what the intention is behind this. And so, I guess if I would have been in a different place in my life, I probably would have, opened up to that person and talked to him about how that made me feel. But because I wasn't in that particular place at that time, and because it sort of like made me feel kind of ostracized in some way, or even ridiculed by the person, I was kind of like, forget this jerk. I'm never coming back here again. I think when you look at international student populations, so like on the K-State campus, I think in some ways, again, there are stigma against seeking services, mental health. They maybe don't necessarily have a very strong mental health system in their country of origin, and so they don't necessarily know what it looks like. So I think, in some ways, campuses, and I think one of the things that we're trying to do in counseling services and improve our outreach to those different groups as well.
Excellent. Well, we're going to go ahead and take another quick break. But once again, you're listening to 91.9 KSDB Manhattan. and we are having a roundtable discussion on mental health. And if you have any questions, please, again, feel free to call, and that number is 785-532-0919, or hit us up on our social media at KSDB FM. Welcome back, everyone, to the KSDB Roundtable discussion on mental health, and we are here with Chaz, Michelle, Tina, and Karen. And we've been talking through a lot of different issues involving anxiety, depression, suicide as well. And if there are anybody out there that, again, has questions that they would like asked, please feel free to call, and that number is 785-532-0919. Okay, and we'll just keep going right through these questions here. We talked a little bit last break about how there's a certain stigma about seeking help, and maybe the different demographics or age groups or genders that have stigmas towards seeking help. So let's kind of keep on that same path, and let's bring in the topic of antidepressants. I know there are a lot of people that do feel like they should not take medications for the problems that they have, or that maybe that those medications make them different in a certain way in their personality, and they don't like to take them, or just the fact that society looks down upon people who have to take medication. So if there's any thoughts that you guys have on stigmas on taking antidepressants or other medications involving mental health, I'd love to hear about it.
Well, antidepressant is one type of medication that's used to treat mental health problems. So there are different categories. There's anti-anxiety medication, antipsychotic medication, mood stabilizers, stimulant medication, depending on what the mental health problem is. I think the research supports over and over again that medication may be a part of the answer, but it's not the entire answer. And unfortunately, we live in a little bit of a quick fix society. I mean, I know I am. If I'm sick, I want this over with and done. Give me the pill. I want to, then what do you mean I have to take this for 10 days? So I think, first of all, medication doesn't work immediately. Usually, these groupings of medication take some time to build up in the body. And unfortunately, our research isn't at a point yet where we can just take a blood test and say, oh, it looks like your dopamine levels are low, so we're just going to add a little bit of this medication here to increase your dopamine levels and you won't be depressed anymore. I mean, I think that day will come, but we're not there yet. And so sometimes there's medication takes some trial and error, and it takes a lot of coordination with primary care physicians, prescribers like psychiatrists or advanced practice nurses. But also outside of that, sometimes there are environmental factors, just kind of coping skills or strategies, things that we need to change about our own outlook and focus in life that's going to help also more long-term change kind of some of our thinking style or thinking patterns about things that maybe just a pill's not going to take care of by itself. And so we really encourage people to look at medication in collaboration with a therapeutic process or therapy, sometimes even family therapy, depending on what those issues are. Looking at changing environmental factors, rehearsing and using coping strategies. And so again, regarding the stigma, there's been some stigma about taking medication or psychotropic medication for a mental health problem, about as much as there is about mental health problems too. But I am seeing more literature. I don't know about the other respondents here, but I've seen more and more literature that's helping to normalize that some people will need to take medication on a short-term basis. Some people will need to take medication depending on the severity of their mental health problem long-term, just like we do with physical health. And I'm hoping our culture's getting to the point where we're seeing mental health and physical health working together, because we're not, our body doesn't stop from the neck up, that they all work together. The brain and the body work together.
Yes.
I guess I would add also that one thing I tend to hear is that if I go to therapy, my therapist is going to push medication. And I just want to say that's not true. I think most therapists are, they're going to respect your wishes. They're going to ask you how you feel about medication, if you've ever taken medication, how you respond to it. They're going to respect if you want to try it right away and refer to a psychiatrist. But if you are someone who absolutely does not want to take medication, they're going to focus on some of those lifestyle changes, and like Karen was saying, the thoughts that a person might have that might be contributing to some of the depression or anxiety.
Okay, excellent. And then I guess we do have a question from Twitter, so we will go ahead and take that question right now. This question comes from Andrea, and she says, I recently had a friend commit suicide back in my hometown. Can you give advice on how to cope after losing someone to suicide?
Well, first, I'm very sorry to hear that, because every suicide has tragic ripples and effects. And so I think a lot of what people experience after the loss of suicide is extreme grief, of course. And I've been in that position myself. So I can understand that level of grief and hurt and sorrow and pain. I think a lot of times acquaintances of the loved one who's died often question themselves, or, what happened? This is very confusing, or was this a hint? Was this a sign? Should I have picked up on something different? A lot of what ifs or should haves. And if I could suggest that we allow ourselves not to go down those roads, because there's no good end to that, and that's sometimes a circular road, and it just leads to more circles and depression and anxiety and just concern and grief about that person. My suggestion is, as we grieve, as we go through the processes of grief after losing someone, especially to suicide, is to try to celebrate what we remember the best about that person, and understand that this person was fighting for a long time with perhaps symptoms of depression, and the reasons. I mean, that's the other thing I think people want to debate about, reasons or need a reason. And I've had to talk to family members about making peace with the fact that we may not know the reason. We may not have a satisfying answer. In fact, there isn't going to be a satisfying answer. And so instead, to focus on more positive attributes of the person, about healthier times, about good memories, and really kind of reflecting more on that and the legacy that person left, the positive legacy that person has left, I think is more helpful to those who are grieving and mourning.
And I would add that sometimes I also am very sorry to hear about that loss. I want to add that sometimes what I see is people going through a significant amount of anger, and even when people come in to see me, sometimes will interview me about what are my thoughts about suicide, and a lot of that really centers around the belief that suicide is a selfish act. And certainly there are people who believe that, and as a loved one, I can't imagine that you might feel that way. But what we know about suicide is that most people don't want to die. They want their pain to end. And I think that piece is really important.
Okay, well, thank you, and hopefully Andrea had some good responses there to use. We'll keep moving on through our questions here. Is there, and just kind of to speak towards suicide and depression, are there any specific correlations, I mean, especially for college students, with increasing tuition rates that just seem to be going up and up and up, and also just the financial burden of college in general, and maybe those expenses that come along with it? Is there any correlations that you see with those rising costs and rates of depression and suicide among young people?
Where I see that to be an issue, and again, I'm in private practice, and I do see college students. Where I see that to be mostly an issue is if a student is, I don't hear them saying specifically, my college tuition went up, but what I do hear is I've got to maintain my classes and work an extra job, and it just, the stress and the anxiety that's caused by that just really piles on. So it does. If you are paying your own way through school and the tuition keeps going up, I can only imagine that would add to it.
I would reiterate some of what Tina said there too. I think a theme I have heard is beyond what label we give it, what diagnosis we give it, beyond all that, because it really is a man-made kind of thing, is hopelessness. I think when people feel like there's just no future for me, there's no way out of this, and I can't get rid of this pain. And I think pain is very much so at the core of suicide, and that decision is based on very unclear thinking in that moment. And during some of the trainings that I've been in, we talk a lot about pain, and we think about pain usually as a physical thing. And, that stupid question you get asked at the emergency room on a scale of 0 to 10, rate your pain, and we all have a different scale because, my 10 is always going to be labor. And not everybody is going to think about pain that way. But I think sometimes we forget that we all have different emotional pain scales too. And so what affects, what level of stress and emotional pain that someone's experiencing, where they're at their 10 may look differently for somebody else. And sometimes we impose our pain scale on others and assume, well, that shouldn't be as stressful, or that shouldn't be as hurtful, or you shouldn't be that depressed, or you shouldn't be thinking about suicide because of that relationship breaking up. That should only be a 4 or 5 on your pain scale. I mean, you got a whole future ahead of you. There's other guys. This'll mend itself. It'll look different, in a few days. But the reality is when people are in that situation and they're experiencing that level of pain, that's usually all they can think about. And as Tina mentioned, I think it's really about ending that pain. And so what we can do to understand people, to support them, to listen non-judgmentally and not impose our judgment on their pain, I think can also go a long way.
And if I might piggyback on that a little bit, speaking of pain, I think that's why we see a high correlation between substance use or abuse and suicide, is that numbing that with alcohol or drugs is a way to decrease or
escape pain.
Escape pain.
Disinhibit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. Well, we're going to go ahead and take another quick break. But when we come back, we'll kind of wrap things up a little bit here, and then also make sure that everybody gets out the different resources that they have available to everybody that has on campus, and people in the military as well. So we'll talk more about the resources available to everyone after the break, but you're listening to KSDB's Roundtable Discussion. And if you, again, want to get any last-minute calls in or for questions, you can do that at 785-532-0919. Welcome back, everybody, to the KSDB Roundtable discussion surrounding mental health. I'm here with Chaz, Michelle, Tina, and Karen. And again, we're going to be this is going to be our last segment. So if you do have any questions, please call in, and that is 785-532-0919. So the last real question that I have is, we've talked about this a little bit before too, is that society kind of spends a lot of time obsessing over physical health. And physical image, and becoming physically fit and stronger, and there's always outlets for that. There's plenty of those that you can find anywhere you go. There's a commercial or an ad or a product that you can use to help you get more physically fit. But are there any things that you guys see that are just like maybe some tips or some ideas or places to go that you can get that help to kind of grow your mental health? Instead of focusing on the physical health, I guess, improving your physical health, are there ways to improve your mental health on your own?
So one of the things I like to recommend to people is calm.com. It's a relaxation website. It's free. There's an app. Like I said earlier, you can start off with just 2 minutes and you can build yourself up. There's a lot of research that shows yoga really helps. With the Vietnam vets, there's been a lot of research that shows that yoga will help bring your mind and your breath and your body together. Services for veterans in the area, there's a VA clinic in Junction City. There's the Veterans Vet Center here in Manhattan. And then, of course, there's the VA hospital in Topeka. If you're an active duty soldier, of course, there's behavioral health on post with embedded mental health clinics within the brigades. So the idea is so you don't have to see a bunch of different providers each time. There's a lot of websites to help you learn how to relax, identify some coping skills that you may not even recognize that you're using that are positive, that you can maybe increase, bring that to the forefront to use even more.
Yeah, I would add that having seen college students, the apps are huge. I mean, I don't have any specifically with me right now, but you can do a search for apps on anxiety, depression. A lot of times there are apps that will have you rate your emotions at a given time or so many times throughout the day. That just at the end it makes a graph. I mean, just have you check in. People are doing a lot more journaling. There's online places to journal now as well. But just kind of wanted to bring up that the apps seem to be kind of a big thing right now.
Can I recommend a few? Am I allowed to say their names?
Oh, sure.
So one that I found to be really effective, not just for myself, but clients that I've worked with, it's called the Insight Timer. It's a free app in the Android or iPhone universe. It's got over 100 different mindfulness meditations that people can use. There's some that are specific to like anxiety or stress. If you're having issues with sleep, I saw one about, if you're if you're thinking about dying, and what sort of that process is like. There's another one known as Pacifica, and all the apps that I'm mentioning are free. That's a thought tracking app, a mood tracking app. At the end of the day, it'll ask you how you're feeling. You rate your emotion on a scale from excellent to terrible, and then you can talk about what sort of things are going on with you that particular day. There's an app called Escape, so that's lowercase e and then scape. It's actually a music app, and what it does when you download it to your phone, it puts the music that you have into different categories, from depressed to energetic to excited to calm to somber. And then you can pick your playlist based upon, what sort of emotion you want to be experiencing at that time. It's, probably a little bit of like mumbo jumbo, but it's kind of a neat app. But you can even trace your music from, I'm feeling really anxious right now and I want to feel more calm. What's another good one? Oh, there's an app called Take a Break. It's got some 15-minute mindfulness things a person can do. It has some background music. It has some background noises, like plays ocean sounds, things like that. As far as students can come to K-State Counseling Services as long as they're currently enrolled in classes. As I mentioned before, we have our counselor and duty shift, and so if you're in crisis and you feel like you need to be seen that day, you can walk in and you can meet with a clinician, usually right away after you fill out a little bit of our paperwork. We've got the online resource, which is kstate.edu/counseling. From there, you can actually access a couple of online classes, one that deals with stress management, the other one that deals with academic anxiety. We have the AODE office, which is the Alcohol and Other Drug Education Service office, which I work with. If students have questions about substance use, if they've got concerns about friends who maybe have some substance use issues, I can, sometimes kind of talk them through, what are some ways that you might bring this up in a conversation with them. We've got group therapy at Counseling Services, which is just a fantastic resource. I think oftentimes students are anxious about group because I don't want to sit around with a group of people talking about my issues. And I've rarely heard a student that has gone and been invested in the process come out and say that was just absolutely horrible for me. That's co-facilitated by our clinicians that are on staff. If you're dealing with things like social anxiety, you've got some concerns about, what is it that makes it problematic for people to connect with me, I think group therapy can be a really nice resource.
Okay. And actually, really quickly, we do have a phone call. So we'll get back to, again, talking more about resources that everybody has available to them and the different resources that you guys all specialize in. But we have this call from Paul in Manhattan, Kansas. So, Paul, what is your question?
Well, I don't especially have a question. I've heard part of the show. I wasn't able to catch all of it, but so far I really liked and appreciated what's been shared and this kind of open dialogue our society could use more of. And I personally would like to see and hope that the stigma or negative reputation of either taking medications for mental illness or going to see a therapist or counselor if that diminishes and it's become more and more acceptable and understood and appreciated by people. I know people who are kind of concerned about, what other people will think and status. Myself, I'm not like that. I'm going to do what I need to do for me, and if someone has a silly attitude about it, too bad, So that's basically what I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you so much for calling
Thank you,
in,
Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Do you have any comments for Paul? Or
Well, it was a really brave thing for him to call in and share his thoughts and his concerns and really appreciate it. So thank you.
Excellent. So we'll go ahead and continue on here in our last segment here. So just we were bringing up again just resources that are available for everybody that you can use, and especially ones that you might specialize in or know about. So Chaz spoke a little bit about his, and Karen, do you want to continue with maybe some resources that you have available?
Oh, sure. I can speak a little bit about Pawnee mental health. We provide services or mental health services, an array of services here in Manhattan or Riley County, but we also cover 10 counties. And there are 26 other sister mental health centers throughout the state of Kansas. So even if a student leaves campus, graduates, or goes home, or stays in the state of Kansas, please know that there are other community mental health centers that are available that have similar services to what Pawnee Mental Health has. So we also provide services to people who have insurance or who don't. And so often we provide services on a sliding fee scale. We provide assessments, and those assessments could be a mental health assessment, kind of talking about what's going on, how can we best help you. We also provide a variety of different kind of assessments that include substance use disorder treatment or evaluations or assessments. We provide individual therapy and group therapy, medication management services, psychiatric crisis services. So somebody who's in crisis, maybe having thoughts of suicide, we have a 1-800 number as well. That's 1-800-609-2002. And that number will connect to a therapist who will help triage what needs to happen next or talk to the individual, and then even deploy some of our mental health staff over our 10-county area to meet with the person 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And then for people with severe mental health problems, maybe severe emotional disturbances or mental health problems that are of more of a moderate to severe level that might need community support services in the community. So we provide case management services to individuals with severe mental health problems, and even other community-based services in classrooms throughout our service area, in people's housing or helping them access housing or other resources. So that's kind of a little bit about Pawnee Mental Health. If I could say a quick word too about a program that I'm kind of excited about at Pawnee, is one called Mental Health First Aid, which is a nationwide program, Mental Health First Aid USA. And, when we're talking about people are calling in and asking, how do I help this person, or how do I reach out, or what do I do, or how do I recognize these symptoms? This is a program that was actually started in Australia, and it was developed around this very issue, is this literacy that's needed about mental health, that the media tends to have driven these ideas that are misinformed, and then we have this stigma attached to mental illness. And so a nurse named Betty Kitchener in Australia had realized we need something different. We need a curriculum to educate lay people in the community so that we can demystify this whole topic. And so she developed it, started in Australia, went to New Zealand, through Asia, and came to the United States. And there's instructors all over the country. If you're interested in taking a mental health course, if you just go to mentalhealthfirstaid.org. And then at Pawnee, we have several trainers throughout our 10-county service area. It's an 8-hour certification class. So much like a lot of people get certified in basic first aid or CPR, it really follows that kind of training. And you learn about different mental health problems, all the ones we talked about today: depression, anxiety, suicide prevention. It talks about psychosis. It talks about substance use disorders. And then what is your action plan? It gives you tools in that toolbox about how do I help somebody from a layperson's perspective. How do I reach out to someone and my neighbor, a family member, or professionally if I'm a nurse or I'm a pastor. And so we've been trying to take this training out, and I think we've trained well over 1,000 individuals in our service area to just people in the community, because we know professional help is not always available, that people sometimes resist help because maybe of stigma, maybe because of cost, and that we want to equip more people in the community who are going to know how to respond, especially in a crisis situation, to alleviate that crisis, to give support to people, and then be able to encourage professional help and self-help about how can you help your own mental health. So it's a program I strongly endorse. And if anyone, any of the listeners are interested in taking a mental health first aid course, you're welcome to go to the mentalhealthfirstaid.org website or Pawnee.org website to find out when the next class is.
So I would say I mostly in private practice will provide outpatient treatment and crisis services to my existing clients. And I just cannot say enough about our community mental health center, Pawnee Mental Health. I used to work there. It's just a fabulous place. Everyone there works tirelessly, and the kinds of crisis services they provide round the clock is amazing. So oftentimes, if I have someone in crisis, I will try to handle it myself, but sometimes if I feel like the person may need more extensive, a more intensive level of treatment, sometimes one thing that's really comforting is just to know that Pawnee's there for the community. So I do want to add that as well.
Okay. And Michelle, did you have any other comments on just resources for our veterans or military members that they can reach out to?
Well, as I mentioned, there's the Vet Center here on 4th and Houston, and the VA clinic in Junction City, as well as the main hospital in Topeka. You call that 1-800-273-8255. Interesting thing, my grandpa was a World War II vet and struggled with suicidal ideation quite a bit and lived in California. And I call that number, as a professional, I know what to do, but at that moment, being with my grandpa, I couldn't think of anything. So I called that number, and they were really making sure I was okay, And so even if you don't know what to do, that's a good number that anyone could call. They can be very helpful for you.
Okay, excellent. Well, I guess one last thing I was just kind of thinking of, but for people such as yourselves, like yourselves, that may be looking to get a further education on social work or things like that, what would you tell those young people that are aspiring to be future social workers or psychologists or psychiatrists?
Well, my alma mater is KU.
Oh.
So, unfortunately,
can we turn her microphone off?
Well, there's no graduate program here, but social work program here at K-State is fantastic. I mean, just the foundation that I had to go to KU to get my master's degree, and then after that, there's you work on your clinical hours. So, being a veteran, a lot of the skills that I learned in the military and becoming a social worker just seemed like a hand-in-glove fit for me. Knowing the local resources, I have to say one of the reputations I've developed through my friends is I know what's going on. I make it my business to know what's going on around town and what's new and what resources are available, just so I can share that information with everyone.
I often visit with college students, high school students who are interested in I think the terms often used, no offense, Chaz, is just psychology, because everybody thinks if you're a therapist, you're a psychologist. And while psychologists are good therapists, and I don't mean to say that, I think people need to think that the field's broader than that. And so I do try to open up people's minds or open up options for people to think about in terms of there's different credentials, there's different lines of study, there's different focuses of study. I do encourage college students to think about where they're going to live, because different states have different requirements, different credentials. I've had colleagues move to Kansas with a master's degree in what they thought was a counseling field, but could not get licensed as that here in Kansas. So it is really important to, especially as people are thinking about graduate schools, that you really investigate carefully or talk to some people in the field about different degree programs. I'm a social worker, graduated from graduate degree from Washburn, but I have to tell you something about this MFT program here at K-State. I'm incredibly impressed. At Pawnee, we have we work a lot with the MFT program, and we have a lot of new interns coming in, and I have to swallow my pride a little bit because I'm a social worker, but these MFD interns are incredible. they're so well trained. They really focus. If therapy is something they're really wanting to work on, because social workers are a little bit more broad. There's lots of different areas that we can go into, whether it be hospital social worker, kind of health care, or more coordination, or foster care, and lots of others. Mental health, of course, being one of those. But if therapy is your thing, you're really interested in that. I'm very impressed with the marriage and family therapy program here, and the interns and then applicants and employees that we have gotten from K-State. So bravo.
And I'd just like to provide some encouragement to those who might be considering this field. If you find yourself one of the people that really has a passion for listening to others, and you can show your compassion, and you're kind of worried, can I do this? I would just say, go for it, because we all felt inadequate at some time, and along the way you have wonderful mentors and supervisors who tell you what you're doing wrong and right. So
yeah, I would say, depending on the routes that you go, I mean, there's going to be a lot of hoops that you'll jump through along the way. There's the graduate school, and then there's the training after, where you've got to get, well, depending on the state, continuing education credits. There's the licensure exam. There's maybe the qualifying exams, and it can seem kind of daunting, but then when you get to the end of it, you really appreciate the things that you've gone through. Now, that could be like, cognitive dissonance, and sort of like, I put up with all this stuff for some reason, so obviously I loved it. But, I would definitely say my job is incredibly fulfilling. Just kind of a plug for counseling services. Again, we've got some wonderful people on staff. Just in case, because I don't think I said that number before, it's 785-532-6927. Our staff are incredibly dedicated and hardworking. But again, if you're interested in going into the field, I would say educate yourself about the program ahead of time. Know a little bit about what. Don't necessarily want to say their credentials, but you've got to be careful at times, because there's sort of this psychology mill sometimes that happens, where they're taking, and I don't want to get into this topic, but they're taking large quantities of money from people, and these individuals aren't able to find jobs to be able to pay off the debt that they incur. So do your research, but have that passion about it, I think. Eventually learning how to compartmentalize, learning how to consult with other professionals, and I think is another thing that definitely makes a job worthwhile.
Well, and self-care. It's number one.
All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up this discussion here, but I just want to say thank you to all of our wonderful guests this evening, and all of you who listen. And if you, again, want to hear this, hopefully we'll have it posted on our website later. We'll have a recording of this whole discussion for your listening opportunity. But that will do it for us here. You have listened to 91.9 KSDB Manhattan.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to tonight's roundtable discussion. The views and opinions expressed tonight are not necessarily those of KSDB, its staff, underwriters, K-State, or the Kansas Board of Regents. Listen for more upcoming roundtable discussions in the coming weeks. This has been a production of KSDB News.